So what are the early best decks with the Forged in the Barrens expansion? I'm going to tell you right now, and these are going to be based on my own personal experience, my own statistics, and statistics from Hearthstone Replay. So let's jump into it. The first one is Libram Paladin. Libram Paladin is, at High Legend and just Normal Legend, the highest win rate deck in the game right now. And honestly, it's because you have really, really good early game with obviously the secrets, some good one-drops with First Day of School, Elder Attendant, and the Knight. You have good mid-game with a 3-drop that draws you cards, Kazakus, the Elder Truthseeker, decent card draw, which is something that Libram Paladin struggled with in the past, and then really good late game with Lady Liadrin to get you all of your resources back. And it just outvalues pretty much everything it plays against. Aggro decks, you lose because you are able to heal up 16 HP. The Sword of the Fallen is a card I think needs a nerf because it basically is draw 3 cards for 2 mana in the form of a weapon, and it also just has all of the things that were broken about Librams to begin with by making them a lot cheaper. This deck is really, really strong. If you want a deck to climb with, this is probably the best one. You don't even need Talon. It really only needs the 2 legendaries right here, and instead of Talon, you could probably just run another Oh My Yogg and be fine. Next, we have Watchpost Rogue. And Watchpost Rogue, I've already made a video on this, and it's because it basically accelerates your board and your cards because Efficient Octobot basically makes your cards cost 1 less, while also slowing down your opponent. So the Far Watchpost makes their cards cost 1 more, and the Marshon Watchpost punishes them for playing cards. So essentially, you go up 1 in value, they go down 1 in value, and since you're already a fast deck to begin with, them going down 1 in value means they fall really, really far behind. Like if you go pew, and they're supposed to go slow, ramp up. If you slow down their ramp up, they'll just never catch up. I don't know if you could see that on the camera because the camera's really small, but the whole point is you're here, you slow them down, and they just never catch you. And that's basically what this deck does, and then you finish them off with Penflingers and good spells, or Shadow Stepping Kazakus like 2 times to get a ton of golems. This deck has everything you could possibly want, and it's fairly cheap. You don't really need Cargill. He's more of just a late game win condition. Mancrick's free. Jandis is one of the best 5-drops in the game. And Kazakus, he's pretty good. But you can take out a legendary, replace it with Wand Thief, and you should at least be okay until you save up enough dust to get the other one. The next deck is actually Frenzy Warrior, which is my personal favorite right now. And that's because I did really, really well with it. I didn't think this deck would be as good as it was, but it really brings you back to the good old days of Hearthstone, where you fight for the board. You get some good value trades, you generate value on board, you have decent draw, and just decently statted minions, and eventually you'll push through, swing, and do a lot of damage. It's not ridiculous ramp, it's not crazy combos, it's not infinite value off of Librams, it's just good minions, good draw, and smart trades. And I absolutely love this deck. I'm 8-3 with it right now. It's the deck I've played almost the most this expansion so far because I really just enjoyed playing it. And in terms of legendaries, you actually don't need a lot of these. I would say Rakara you do need. And the Overlord you do need. But Talon is really just to draw the Overlord. The Doctor, he's okay, but you don't need. Karagath, you don't need. Mancrick, you get for free, and ETC is good damage, but again, you don't need them. You could take these cards out and replace it with an Imprisoned Gnarg. You could replace it with a couple of extra Rush minions if you want to get some extra value that way, or just good tempo cards. Like, you could potentially run the Stage Hand to pump up some minions in your hand to get extra value that way. You could run maybe a little bit of removal in case you play into an aggro matchup. You could play one of these cheaper Rush minions and try to get value that way. Steel Dancer because you have good weapon synergy because you have some good 3-attack weapons, so it's not terrible. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways that you could play this deck if you don't need those legendaries. So overall, personally my favorite deck right now, or at least one of. And yeah, I would recommend playing it. Next, we have Primordial Druid, and this does not run the Celestial Alignment, and let me explain why. Celestial Alignment just makes things really clunky. If you play this card, you can't play Carnival Clown. It makes it a little bit weird to play Survival of the Fittest. Guess the Weight is no longer able to draw you 2 cards because everything costs 1. Innervate and Lightning Bloom become essentially useless draws. So even though there is a ridiculously good potential if you play something like Nourish right after playing Celestial Alignment, and not only can you play all of these cards for like 1 mana, right? The problem is I think that this version is just better, where you play around playing multiple clowns, ramping up, playing around guardian animals in order to get you good value and just winning the game off of that. And it's something that worked last expansion and really only lost to like aggro matchups killing you before you were able to do anything, and with aggro being weaker this expansion, this build is just better. You don't need Talon in terms of legendaries. Moonfang you don't need either. If you don't have one of those cards, you could theoretically just run a Teacher's Pet, so that way you have a little bit more synergy with the guardian animals, and that's about it. You guys can disagree with this deck. You guys can try to run the Celestial alignment if you want. It's just from what I've seen and what I've played, because I did try this deck a little bit, it just felt weird and clunky. It basically, you ramp into a dead turn, and then you finally get to play the game and do crazy stuff turn 7 or 8, and it just felt a little bit slower than just jumping right into guardian animals for me. Anyway, let's jump into the next one. So the next deck on this list is Hero Power Mage, and I really love this deck. Not only are you able to use these watch posts in order to generate you, well, not generate you, but lose your opponent value, while also giving you a late game win condition. You also have some really cool synergies with your Hero Power. Wildfire, making it a 2 damage ping, sometimes more, is really strong. The Reckless Apprentice, doing all of that damage to the opponent's entire board, is really good. And then the Mordresh, being able to basically Pyroblast the entire board while also making a 10 mana 10/10, is just kind of broken. So you have really good late game, you have decent survival early with some good draw, and good mid game with things like Jandis, like I said, along with Varden, Reckless Apprentice, Ogremancer, and ways of consistently drawing Mordresh with Talon. So overall, this deck has just really good value, decent early game. It's got everything you could possibly want from a mage deck. It is a little bit expensive because I do think you need at least a couple of these legendaries. Like the Astromancer is just insane value. I guess you don't need Varden. You could replace that with another Imprisoned Observer. Jandis is really good. Talon you don't need. You could replace that with maybe another Devolving Missiles, so that way you can deal with boards a little bit easier if they pump it up like in Druid or Paladin. Mordresh is the entire win condition of your deck, and Cargill is very good because you have Watch Posts. So overall, I'd say that this deck is fairly expensive, but it's worth it. It's one of my favorite decks. I had an absolute blast playing it, and I would highly recommend playing it if you haven't already, and you have a little bit of dust to use. So yeah, let's jump into the next one. So this is the only deck on this list that I haven't actually personally played, but it is, I think, the most common matchup I've played against, except for maybe Libram Paladin / Secret Paladin. This deck has basically everything you could possibly need. It's got good draw. It's got, to be fair, a ridiculous amount of RNG. It's got late game potential with Cthulhu. Good value with cards like Apexis Blast and Font of Power, giving you tons of resources for really cheap. And then you also have this card, Refreshing Springwater, which is draw 2 cards, refresh 2 mana crystals for each spell drawn. So since you know for a fact every card in your deck is a spell, this is basically a free draw 2. You also have good removal with things like Combustion and Devolving Missiles and Brain Freeze, and at the end of the day, when it boils down to is just the fact that you have so much value so quickly that your opponent just can't keep up, especially if you play in Cantor's Flow. Because being able to generate 3 cards for 1 mana, being able to get a 5-drop and deal 5 damage for 5 mana, if not cheaper within Cantor's Flow, is insane. Drawing 2 cards for free is insane. This new Flame Strike doing 5 damage to all enemy minions is really strong because it's just strictly better than what it used to be. All these things combined make this deck to be a lot stronger than I thought it was going to be going in, but after playing against it so many times, I've realized that there's a lot of potential for this deck, and I'm excited to try it out, probably the day I post this video. So the last deck on this list is Miracle Rogue, and the reason why it's a little bit lower than Watchpost Rogue is even though this deck can double down and go extra fast, I think that just playing the Watchpost and slowing down your opponent while also speeding yourself up is just better than going really fast yourself. But don't get me wrong, this deck has insane value. You run Tenwu, which means you get to bounce Mankrik, Kazakus, or Jandis back to your hand 1 extra time, which can be really helpful. You have a couple of extra spells, which means Penflinger can do more damage. Cheaper spells, which means it's easier to combo off. And overall, it's just really good. And if you don't have something like Kazakus or Tenwu, you could probably replace them with a Sinister Strike to just add a little bit more damage to your kit. In fact, if you don't want to run Wand Maker, you can do the same thing. I just like running Wand Maker because there are a lot of good one-drop spells, and sometimes they can be good in different situations. So overall, this deck is really, really good. And now it's time to jump just into the honorable mentions. So the honorable mentions for this are really just Shaman, Aggro Shaman, Face Hunter, and Ticketus Warlock. And I'm going to jump into all these real quick. So Aggro Shaman is just a very aggressive Shaman deck, but the problem with this, as well as Face Hunter, is just the fact that the watch posts slow you down too much, whether it be increasing your card's costs, which slows down aggro decks a ton, or generating minions based on the minions you play. You just lose so much tempo because of these watch posts and a lot of these like really good mid-range cards right now, that there's really not a great chance for you to win with these decks. Like, I'm 5-3 with Face Hunter, and I'm gonna play Aggro Shaman tomorrow, but it has a good win rate on Hearthstone Replay apparently. And even though these two things hold true, it just doesn't feel good. Like, even when you win, it feels like you're just barely getting there. You're just barely getting across the finish line, and if a couple of things had gone differently, you would have lost. So even though I'm winning, I don't feel as confident playing these decks as I do playing some of the other decks. And then we have Ticketus Warlock, which I think is just better than Mill Warlock. You basically just control the board, play some of these watch posts to slow down aggro decks and just other value decks. You eventually get to the late game with Ticketus to burn your opponent's cards, Gargle in order to, you know, basically generate a board of 5/5s. Obviously, you still have Sociologist, Twisting Nether Strongman combo, Lord Draxus for late game, Yashraj to get Ticketus back, great cascading disaster value, but the problem is if you play against something like Rogue or Paladin, you don't really have the tools to deal with their insane value. So I feel like if those two decks get nerfed, this deck will do really, really well because it does well against a lot of other decks, I think personally. But it does kind of bad into that Rogue and Paladin matchup, and because of that, and I think they're the best decks in the game right now, and they're the most played decks in the game right now, other than also Spell Mage, which is kind of problematic for this deck too. It just means that this deck isn't able to really produce what I know it can produce, and it's really just because of the meta. But if the meta slows down and those two classes are nerfed, I could see Ticketus being really, really good, so we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you do, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I really enjoy all the support you guys give me with all of this. With the new expansion, I'm going to come out with a ton of content, and I can't wait to make my budget series, or basically I take every deck that I played and then make it budget. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed.